What if your life depended on strangers raising millions for you in Saudi Arabia?
Inshallah, inshallah.
This is a story of fate,
Inshallah,
opportunity,
you'll find
and hard luck, or as some people like to call it, being in the right place
you'll find
at the wrong time. Sulaimon Olufemi was born on April 20th, 1978 in Lagos, Nigeria. After years of being childless, his parents finally had him alongside two other siblings. His family describes him as gentle, not troublesome, a good son. And in September 2002, he got an opportunity to travel to Saudi Arabia for Umrah, an Islamic pilgrimage that can be undertaken at any time of the year. Sulaimon called up a friend, and they agreed that he will stay with this friend in Jeddah. He believed it was the start of something great, but he had no idea it would become the beginning of an 18-year nightmare. When Sulaimon arrived Jeddah, his friend's telephone number was not working. As troubling as this incident was, the next incident of his life would make this one look like child's play. A lady he met at the airport suggested to Sulaimon to go to Karantina, a suburb of Jeddah, where he would find lots of Nigerians who might help him locate his friend. Sulaimon went to Karantina and he met some Nigerians. However, he could not locate his friend, and no one there knew who his friend was. But luckily, the Nigerians he met offered him their accommodation to stay. On September 28th, soon after Sulaimon arrived Jeddah, he went with some fellow Nigerians to a car wash in Jeddah where many African people worked. Some locals raided the place, and among them was a police officer. A dispute broke out, tensions escalate, fists fly, and the policeman was struck on the head with a gun. Bleeding from his nose, mouth, and ears, he fell into a coma, then later died from his injuries. This single death changed the path of life for 13 men, including the death of one man, over the next 15 and more years. The next day after the death of the officer, the police launched a massive raid at their accommodation that led to the arrest of some foreign nationals, including 13 Nigerian suspects. But Sulaimon, the youngest, would pay the highest price. According to a co-defendant, at first everyone said basically the same thing over and over. That there were a lot of people at the scene and things got really crazy really fast. Then after 2 or 3 days, the torture started. The arrested suspects were tortured separately. They were hanged upside down, kicked and beaten, and one man was said to have received electric shock treatment to the genitals. Soon, some of them started to admit what they didn't do. Someone said they saw Sulaimon holding a gun to the police officer's head. Sulaimon himself put his fingerprints, which can be taken as a substitute for a signature, to a statement, written in Arabic, a language he did not understand. The implication of what he has done dawned on him when he later learnt in court that he had signed a statement that said that he had hit the police officer over the head with a gun. And this would be a key factor in the upcoming trial and sentences. According to Amnesty International, many of the foreign nationals arrested over the incident were put on trial, sentenced to short prison terms and lashes, and then deported. But Sulaimon Olufemi and 12 other Nigerian nationals were put on trial for the incident as well as the death of the police officer. It was a closed trial throughout the court hearings. There was no lawyer or consular representative present. There was sometimes a translator from Sudan who, when allowed to speak to the men, spoke to them in English and not their native Yoruba language. In fact, things were so unclear that the men didn't understand what was happening. Until one day in court, a judge finally asked them directly, in English, "Why did you kill the policeman?" And once more, they said, "We didn't kill the police officer." However, in May 2005, the 12 of them were each sentenced to 5 years in prison, but upon further review, increased to 7 years in November 30th of the same year, then to 10 years in 2006, and finally 15 years imprisonment with 1,000 lashes. While all these were happening, one of the 12 defendants, Nuruddin Sani, fell ill and due to lack or inadequate medical care, died in prison. The remaining 11 served out their full term and received the 1,000 lashes, given by 50 lashes on 20 different occasions. Next, they were deported 3 months after completing their sentences. As for Sulaimon, he was sentenced to death, and this raised the big question: why? Sulaimon was sentenced to death in May 2005. Same day the others were sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, but his sentence remained constant. Then in April 2007, the Saudi Arabian Human Rights Commission wrote Amnesty International to say that the death penalty has been upheld by the Court of Cassation and the Supreme Judicial Council, meaning Sulaimon has no further recourse to appeal. But why was Sulaimon's sentence so final? Sulaimon remains unique in this case. He alone was sentenced to death, while the others received jail terms, lashes, and deportation. This disparity underscores why Amnesty and Sulaimon's family have continued to press for clemency. But drawing directly from available court records, here's what we know for sure. Sulaimon remains on death row. He was categorized as the principal accused in the case. One of the accused persons said they saw Sulaimon holding a gun to the police officer's head, and Saudi authorities maintained that his fingerprints were found on the gun. But human rights groups took to protests, citing the gross unfairness in his trial. They said Sulaimon was tried alongside 12 other Nigerians in a closed Saudi court, with no public oversight or transparency. No legal representation or consular support was provided at any stage. No adequate translation was supplied. Proceedings were in Arabic, a language Sulaimon couldn't understand. Sulaimon and co-defendants reported harsh physical abuse during interrogation: beatings, electric shocks, and suspension. A thumbprint confession in Arabic was used as primary evidence, despite him not understanding the statement's content. In other words, the procedural unfairness of secret trial, no counsel, no translation, violates international law. The confession under torture used as proof is an evidentiary flaw. There was also unjust sentencing. Only Sulaimon received death, while others received lesser but still harsh punishments. Finally, relief is locked behind dia, meaning his freedom hinges on $500,000, not justice, because of a legal technicality relating to the victim's young daughter. You see, in Saudi Arabia, under Sharia law, if a crime is punishable under the rule of qisas, meaning retribution, as in Sulaimon Olufemi's case, relatives of the murder victim have the right to decide if the offender should be executed or pardoned, in which case the death penalty is dropped, sometimes in return for dia, also known as compensation or blood money. In this case, fortunately, the victim's family was prepared to accept dia. They reportedly requested 2 million Saudi riyals, about $530,000, as dia. If unpaid, they could request execution under Had law. But there was one catch. The victim's youngest daughter, who was only 2 at the time, must reach adulthood before the family could decide whether to pardon Sulaimon. And that's how he spent the next 18 years in prison. In 2020, Amnesty International, a global movement of more than 7 million people who campaign for a world where human rights are enjoyed by all, launched a special campaign to raise awareness that Sulaimon Olufemi has been forgotten on death row in Saudi Arabia. There has been a lack of transparency from the Saudi authorities about Sulaimon's case, so it was unclear whether the youngest child of the deceased police officer has reached the age of 18. However, considering the police officer was said to have died in September 2002, the youngest child may have already reached the age of 18 or will do so soon. Therefore, Amnesty International was concerned about Sulaimon's heightened risk of execution. This fear was not unfounded, considering that Saudi Arabia is one of the most prolific executioners in the world. Between January 1985, the earliest year from when information on executions became available, and December 31st, 2019, the year before the campaign, Saudi Arabia had executed at least 2,900 persons, and about half of them were foreigners, including 12 Nigerians. The death penalty is used disproportionately against foreign nationals in Saudi Arabia, particularly migrant workers from poor and developing countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Sometimes these foreigners have knowledge of Arabic, the language in which they are questioned while in detention and in which trial proceedings are carried out, but they tend not to and are often denied adequate interpretation assistance. Saudi Arabia routinely fails to inform families of prisoners and, in the case of foreign nationals, their foreign consulates of the date of executions. They also fail to directly inform them of executions after they have been carried out, nor are their bodies returned to them to be buried. In many instances, convicted prisoners are informed of their impending execution a day before it is carried out, specifically when they are taken to a solitary cell in preparation for it. Some foreigners have found out about the execution of their relative through the media. But it's been 5 years after the special campaign launched by Amnesty International. So what has really happened? We know the others served their time, underwent corporal punishment, and were subsequently deported. Sulaimon's case stands apart. Charged as the main accused, given a death sentence upheld by Saudi courts, despite broad calls for his release. There has been no transparency on whether payment was ever made. There is no public confirmation that the diya has been fully paid. If the payment had been made, it would likely have been widely reported, especially given the significance under Saudi law. So if you've seen such claims, they may be premature or unverified. And according to Sharia law in Saudi Arabia, pardons by victims' relatives must be certified by courts of law. So it is not automatic that a convicted person is spared from execution, since judges have the power to invoke had, a divinely prescribed fixed offenses and punishments. And they also have to consider whether the murder is harmful to public order, in addition to it being a crime against the victim and his family. Which explains why Amnesty International is calling for either an immediate pardon or a retrial under international standards, plus an investigation into the torture allegations. Sulaimon's family and the Nigerian authorities, including NIDCOM and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, have formally appealed to Saudi Arabia for intervention and support. 18 years on death row for a man many believe never committed murder. A miscarriage of one verdict threatens a life. But his story matters, because injustice anywhere is an attack on justice everywhere. If you believe Sulaimon deserves a new trial, consular support, or an intervention, share this video, subscribe for updates, and let his story be heard.